Now, a different franchise where things feel like they may have run their course after many years of success, unlike the Pelicans, is the Golden State Warriors. Big story this week with Stephen Curry talking on the record about the two timeline stuff. He said the post-mortem on some of the two timeline stuff is not great. We picked Wiseman, who's had a rough go. Not his fault, but we had the number 2 pick and we picked Wise. I mean, it was a pretty honest quote from him in a story where he was talking about the clock's ticking. Like he says he wants to play as long as he can, but he knows the clock is ticking. And then you had Steve Kerr after a Warriors loss this week where he's talking about how his team can't get to the basket, how they're near the bottom of the league in free throws and baskets at the rim. And he says it's the personnel. And then he's asked about, well, is there any trades that could be made? And he says, these are questions from Mike, referring to Mike Dunleavy, their general manager. So I think for Golden State, it's been years really of the front office and ownership, the Lacob family talking about it's hard to make trades. It's tough to trade for stars. Meanwhile, stars are getting traded everywhere, every year around the NBA, and the Warriors are sitting on their hands. Now, maybe you could argue that they were fortunate to whiff on Paul George, who has not looked great for Philadelphia, or fortunate to whiff on Lauri Markkanen, who has had a down year this year for the Utah Jazz. But you still have Stephen Curry performing at an elite level. You still have Draymond Green performing at an elite level, defensively and shooting nearly 40% from three on top of his typical playmaking. But the Warriors are right at 500 basically the entire year after their fast start. This feels like a team that they have to do something. And if they don't do something, to me, their actions just once again will indicate that this is a team that doesn't actually want to go all in around Stephen Curry and Draymond Green. That's what I would feel like if they don't do anything this February leading into the offseason, that they just actually are ready to move on from the era and they actually want those guys to ask out for trades. Because so far, all indications, all their actions are that they don't want to make a trade. So prove me wrong. I'd love to see that from Golden State. I'd love to see them make a deal, Tom.
I would too. And I bet Steph Curry would too. Like, that's the guy who matters. That's the guy who matters. They're 6-15 in their last 21 games with Steph Curry. Steph Curry's been healthy for the majority of that run. 6-15. They've got 5 games in the last month where they failed to break 100 points with Steph Curry in the lineup. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. The roster around Stephen Curry needs to be better, needs to be upgraded. You can't have a guy who's still that good and they can't break 100 in an era where 100 is the new 80. Like, teams are regularly breaking 100 and they can't do it against the Sacramento Kings. Like, come on now. This needs they need to press the button. They need to press the button yesterday. And it's not Dennis Schroeder. That's not the guy. Maybe that's the guy before the guy, but it's not going to be Cam Johnson. It can't be something like that. I think it has to be larger. Jimmy Butler, if Steph Curry and Draymond Green wanted Jimmy Butler, I think that deal would have been done by now. I think both sides are motivated to get a deal, but it is obvious to me that like Jimmy Butler and the Warriors has not been louder, and yet you have Stephen Curry, talking a little bit more than usual. But I feel like the Warriors have an incentive to upgrade and get star power. The Miami Heat have an incentive to upgrade and move on from the Jimmy Butler era. And yet there is no deal. And it seems to me that the Golden State Warriors are dangerously close to a time when Steph Curry this offseason says, like, I've had enough with this. Like, what are we doing? And you hear the little chirping there in that story. But I can tell you, like, Stephen Curry, a guy of that talent, of that caliber, and that legacy all time, deserves much better than what he's getting right now.
Yeah, he absolutely does. And I mean, we'll see what the Warriors end up doing. And one place I will say that the Lakers aren't totally wrong when it comes to it being hard to make a trade is it would be hard to trade for Jimmy Butler because of his salaries and the salaries that they do have. It is tough from the roster limits with the amount of salaries you would have to put together. You would have to add more teams, but it's not impossible. It's not impossible to do if you really did want to go out and get Jimmy Butler.